Ms. Mickelwait, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony.
Thank you very much. Prior to this year, Pornhub was the 10th most trafficked website in the world, with 42 billion visits per year. The site boasted 6.8 million videos uploaded per year that would take 169 years to watch. Pornhub is owned by MindGeek, an international pornography conglomerate that has obtained a monopoly on the porn industry. As the New York Times put it, MindGeek is a porn titan. MindGeek is also what I call a mega sex trafficker, in that its sites are infested with highly monetized commercial crime scene footage of user-generated child sexual abuse, rape, assault, and other forms of non-consensual pornographic content. Every video on Pornhub is commercial. In fact, the totality of videos on the MindGeek sites generate hundreds of millions of dollars per year. The company knowingly has enabled and profited from mass amounts of filmed sex acts induced by force, fraud, or coercion, and the commercial sexual abuse of children. Unfortunately, Pornhub is not alone. There is an entire big porn industry operating similar user-generated porn tube sites. For example, MindGeek's biggest rival, WDCZ, who has had a recent class action lawsuit filed against it on behalf of trafficked minors, boasts 200 million daily visitors and 6 billion daily ad impressions on its sites. Like Pornhub, these websites are set up for exploitation, allowing any user with a cell phone camera to anonymously upload sex acts with only an email address. This lack of oversight and accountability is intentional on the part of these sites because the unlimited ability to upload content by any user in the world is the business model that generates the most profit. For Pornhub and its largest competitors, content is king. The more content that is uploaded, the more traffic is driven to the site, and the more profit is generated from advertising, premium memberships, and the sale of user data. In fact, 50% of Pornhub's profit is generated via advertising. Because profits are the crux of the issue, financial services actors that facilitate and benefit from the exchange of money play a crucial role when it comes to enabling or disabling the crime of sex trafficking on such sites. For example, after 2 million people from 192 countries had signed the petition to hold Pornhub accountable, over 300 organizations called for the site to be shut down. Victims publicly came forward. Lawmakers in the US and abroad called for criminal investigations. Grassroots protests were being organized around the world, and hundreds of media articles were bringing attention to the sexual crime on the site. Pornhub still refused to acknowledge the problem. Even until October 2020, Pornhub told the media that suggestions that children were being exploited on the site were conspiracy theories. However, in December, a groundbreaking New York Times expose put pressure on the major card companies to stop enabling the abuse. MasterCard, Visa, and Discover quickly responded by confirming illegal content on the site, disabling the use of their cards, and in under 24 hours, the 10th most trafficked website in the world deleted 80% of its content, totaling 10 million videos. Not only was this a dramatic admission of guilt on the part of Pornhub, but it was also a demonstration of the power and influence that financial institutions have in regulating even the largest websites in the world. This leverage should have been utilized a long time before it was, not only because it was the right thing to do, but because knowing that trafficking was being facilitated with their services and not taking action is illegal. According to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, knowingly benefiting from a trafficking venture is prohibited. So what are the solutions? First, we urgently need the antiquated law USC 2257 to be amended to hold websites distributing user-generated pornography responsible for age verification and record keeping. This law has been in place for decades to help prevent child abuse from proliferating in the porn industry, but it must be updated to keep up with the times and hold the major online porn distributors accountable for the content that they profit from. Second, we need mandatory reliable age and consent verification procedures mandated for every sex act uploaded online. Reintroducing and passing the bipartisan Stop Internet Sexual Exploitation Act should be a priority. Laws regarding the disclosure of beneficial owners of companies who own such sites is also an important accountability measure. In the case of MindGeek, its executives and owners have intentionally hidden their identities in order to escape scrutiny. Even now, we don't know who is ultimately behind the company. Lastly, enforcement of laws concerning the mandatory reporting of child sexual abuse material must be improved to ensure that companies like MindGeek, which has offices, servers, and substantial consumers in the United States, are held accountable for failing to report known CSAM as legally required. Recent testimony and publicly available data show that despite widespread presence of child exploitation on Pornhub, the company made no reports to Canadian or American authorities for over a decade. This is unacceptable. We need accountability. These actions would go a long way in the realm of sex trafficking prevention in the digital age. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Ms. Mickelwait, we see time and again as websites drag their feet to remove illicit content and fail to report it to the authorities. Should tech companies be held to a higher liability standard when it comes to allowing this material to stay online? And what role could the financial service industry play to help stop illicit actors from profiting from the content generated by human trafficking?
Thank you for that question. I think what's important here is to highlight the harm that these recorded crime scene videos do to these victims. It's one thing for a victim to be subject to rape, to be subject to trafficking, but what I've heard from countless victims who I've spoken with about their abuse online is that it's the immortalization of their trauma. They call it that because they go on with the knowledge that their abuse, that their trauma, the worst moments of their life will live on in the digital space long after they're gone. And they live with that terrorizing knowledge. And so I think that there's this high level of responsibility for sites like Pornhub, like MindGeek owned sites, like X Videos, X Hamster, others that are distributing sex acts, often containing minors, containing trafficked women, containing those who have not given their consent to be uploaded and distributed online. And I think that we must hold them accountable. We need to see age and consent verification when a sex act is uploaded online. I think that would go a long way in the area of prevention, like I mentioned.
Do you think the tech companies should be held to a higher liability, though, in general? Should they be held more responsible for this?
I mean, I think that they should be held responsible as any company that would knowingly benefit from a trafficking venture, would knowingly benefit from the distribution of child sexual abuse material. We have those laws in place, and I think that they need to be applied.
The 115th Congress, for the first time ever, established an exception to Section 230. The exception allows tech companies to be held civilly liable for sexually exploitive content. I have a question for Ms. Mickelwait. To what extent has the law been effective at diminishing the online market for sexually exploitive content? Because I gather from your testimony that online platforms remain widespread facilitators of sex trafficking, even with the threat of civil liability.
Well, one thing that we're seeing now is the utilization of that law. With regard to MindGeek, this specific case, since December, there have been multiple lawsuits launched against the company, filed against the company, utilizing that carve out. And so we are seeing, two class action lawsuits on behalf of trafficked minors, one filed in California, another filed in Alabama. We also have a filing of 40 women who were trafficked on Pornhub, who are also utilizing that law. And so, yeah, we are seeing that this was an important accountability measure, and that it is being utilized. And so I think it is a positive thing.
And you rightly pointed out that the Christoph expose demonstrates that public scrutiny can create a powerful incentive for companies to do the right thing. Is there a role for the federal government to play in monitoring websites for sexually exploitive content and calling out companies that continue to facilitate sex trafficking?
I believe that there is a role for the government to play in accountability for these sites. My recommendations are not just for monitoring, but really, the enforcement of laws, the updating of laws that we have already on the books. For example, I mentioned USC 2257, and this was a law that was adopted decades ago. And the problem with the law is that it's antiquated, it's old. It was implemented to prevent child sexual abuse rape and trafficking in the pornography industry back when DVDs and VHS tapes and magazines were the primary distribution method for this content, and it needs to be updated. And I think that that would go a long way in helping to prevent child exploitation, trafficking on these big porn sites. But also, like I mentioned, the Stop Internet Sexual Exploitation Act, which focuses on age verification and consent verification for sex acts that are being uploaded online. I think, again, that is a very, very critical and important priority that we must focus on to help prevent the distribution of this kind of content in the digital age.
And you made a powerful point about the immortalization of trauma. And I'm wondering, how do we best prevent that? Should porn sites be more like YouTube, which does not allow for downloading? How do we best prevent the immortalization of trauma, as you described earlier?
Well, first, I want to point out that up until the New York Times piece pointed out that there was this download button on every single video. And think about that, 7 million videos uploaded per year. Like I said, 169 years to watch this content. And the company designed the site in such a way that they enabled a download button on every single video, even though they were not verifying age and consent for upload. And we have records that show that they only had under 10 moderators per shift monitoring this content on the site. And so this is a kind of a business model. This is the way that these sites are set up, is to have this unlimited ability to upload, again, because content is king, because traffic is what drives profits. And so I think that, obviously we need to disable the ability for those downloads. But even if you disable the ability for downloads, I mean, people in this day and age can screen record anything online, and then they can redistribute it again and again and again and again for the rest of all time once this gets out of control, once it's uploaded initially onto any of these sites. And so I think the preventative measure before upload, things, these sex acts need to be vetted. There needs to be accountability before upload, before these acts get onto these sites. We need that kind of preventative measures in place.
Online child exploitation is one of the worst issues facing our society. Last year, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received more than 21.7 million reports of child exploitation. That represented a 28% increase over 2019 as folks have been stuck inside during this pandemic. Congress must pay increased attention and provide the requisite funding, but also make the appropriate changes to the law. On that note, Ms. Mickelwait, I want to start with you and pick up where Mr. Torres maybe left off on the immortalization component. I think, frankly, the suggestions that you made in your testimony are common sense. I look forward to working with anybody who wants to work on this to make sure that we get these implemented. I can't see why we would not want reliable age and consent verification procedures for any image of a sex act uploaded online. But on the immortalization piece, what recourse do victims, if any, what recourse do victims have to get the content taken down? Are they able to use the tools of the law to get it taken down, or how would they go about doing that?
Well, this is a huge, huge problem, because even when they are able to get this content taken down, what we find again and again is that it gets re-uploaded again and again and again. And so these victims live in a state of, kind of obsession with trying to find their abuse material online. They live with the fear that, they can't even go out sometimes to the grocery store or apply for a job. They believe that somebody has seen their videos of their exploitation and abuse. Often it causes them to be suicidal, to have suicidal tendencies and thoughts, severe depression, all these things. And so, once these videos get online, these images, it's almost impossible to guarantee that they won't be uploaded again. There are some measures that are implemented on these sites for victims to be able to remove content, but often they're ignored. We have many cases. In the case of, for example, Pornhub.
Can I reclaim? I'm sorry, Ms.
Sure.
Mickelwait, just for a second. I saw Dr. Hatcher nodding her head. I just want to bring her into the conversation. Does that resonate with you, the the story that Ms. Mickelwait was just telling.
Absolutely. I just agree with everything that she's saying. I mean, it causes extreme re-traumatization, and it's like becomes their job to try to find where their images are, where these videos are, and and that constant angst and anxiety at, has someone seen this? And in a lot of cases they have, and so it's a constant sense of re-traumatization.
Ms. Mickelwait, given your experience with Pornhub and MindGeek, how can financial services companies take proactive steps to ensure that their services are not being used to purchase child sexual abuse material online?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, and thank you for your work, Mrs. Wagner. I've, really appreciated as an activist your passion and dedication to fighting sex trafficking specifically. So thank you for that. And I hate to sound like a broken record. Often I feel like I am. But these companies, when you're talking about sex trafficking, when we're talking about sex acts that are being uploaded online, we need accountability and oversight to the nature of those sex acts. And so credit card companies should not be allowing their services to enable transactions if these companies are not verifying that these are not children who are being trafficked and raped for profit on their site, and that these are, and consent and agreement that these are not women who are being assaulted, who are being drugged and raped, who are being trafficked for profit as well.
And if I could, Ms. Mickelwait, because I'm running out of time here,
Sure.
how does the mislabeling of merchant category codes, such as this case with OnlyFans, make it more difficult for financial services companies to monitor potential human trafficking and child sexual abuse?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, my expertise really is focused on the big porn sites like MindGeek sites, and I'm not familiar with those merchant category codes. So unfortunately, that's not a question I would be able to appropriately answer.